Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar. Here Comes the Sun, Driving a Renewable Energy Revolution, hosted by Seniors for Climate. We have 1,400 people registered for this evening, so we'll give people some time to log on and join. Very excited to have a conversation this evening with author and activist Bill McKibben. For those of you who don't know me, I have hosted similar webinars in the past, and I also am the executive director for Reclimate, which is based at Carleton University. So in terms of the agenda, we are welcoming you now, and we have a land acknowledgement. We will have a few words from the organizing members of Seniors for Climate, just about an overview of this year's campaign. And then as we're all looking forward, we'll have a keynote address with Bill, some time for Q&A. Some of those have come through already. We'll do some questions and answers live using, again, the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then we'll do our best to wrap up by 8 p.m. So thank you very much. And I'll hand it over now to Paul, and please to take us through the land acknowledgement.
Thank you. David Robertson is a renowned Winnipeg-based writer and member of the Norway House Cree Nation. He's acclaimed for his work in Indigenous storytelling, graphic novels, children's literature, and memoir. He's a two-time Governor General's Literary Award winner, a podcast host, and a passionate advocate for education and mental health awareness. We want to acknowledge that no matter where we are coming from for this webinar, the land we are on was once populated by Indigenous people. They realized long ago that their very existence was based on reciprocity. It was and is the very land they were living on that gave them life. It provided them with everything they needed to survive and thrive: water, food, shelter, clothing, and clean air. In return, they believe they have the responsibility to ensure the land would be taken care of, because if we continue to abuse its resources, we're in big trouble. It boils down to relationships. We build healthy relationships with one another if you take the time to learn about me and I take the time to learn more about you. In that spirit, we should look at the historical caretakers of the land you're on. But more than that, we should acknowledge who is still here today. Once that is done, think of ways that you can make meaningful connections to create partnerships built on mutual respect and understanding. The last thing to extend the intention of fostering healthy relationships beyond people to consider a relationship with the land itself. We can take better care of it, and we can thank it for what it provides. A respectful finishing touch is to use an appropriate Indigenous word or phrase. Learning a few key words in another person's language is a show of respect. The Cree word for thank you is ekasani. In Inuktitut, it would be kuyanimik. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I would like to invite Louise, Dr. Louise Comeau, who is also my colleague and a volunteer with Seniors for Climate, to talk through a little bit about the 2026 plans. Over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Amber. And welcome, everybody. We're very excited about tonight. I'm going to give you just a very short intro into Seniors for Climate and what we're planning this year. It's, I think, a nice introduction to what Bill will talk about in terms of his program and campaigns. Our vision is big. We do want to see a world beyond fossil fuels, a world that's safe, just, and livable for all. And to achieve that, we see our mission as having a purpose to build a Canada-wide community of seniors to create a livable future. We have a major role to play, and we have motive, commitment, and opportunity. And as much as I love my work at ReClimate, I really love my work with Seniors for Climate because it is a really, really interesting group of people that have come together in a very brief history. We were established in only 2024 at that time to plan a Canada-wide day of action. We had a very successful event on what we basically commandeered National Seniors Day with events across the country. Then we repeated it with an event on April 22nd on Earth Day last year and another event last September and decided to move to a two event a year program. And so who are we? Well, we're seniors deeply alarmed by the climate crisis, and we represent over 10 million Canadians aged 60 years and up. That's 1 in 4 Canadians. And we do have an outsized political, economic, and social power to exercise. And of course, part of that is because we vote. In terms of our network, we started with 6 sponsoring groups that created this national network of seniors and quickly have grown a very large endorser list of groups. You'll see many of the logos that may be familiar to you, groups that you are already participating in or know about. And we function with all of those partners in play. Our steering committee is made up of our sponsors and some other representation. We have a coordinating committee that many of us are part of that do the day-to-day work through working groups that cover communications, finance, outreach, and webinars. We have monthly organizers meetings. We've grown to over 5,000 subscribers. And so part of what we want to say here tonight to folks on the call is join us. We're fun. We like to do interesting things, and we need more volunteers, of course. We also are fundraising from subscribers through the Small Change Fund crowdfunding page, but sponsors and endorsers and foundations are also contributing to our work, which in turn supports our work across the country. We now have over 90 seniors-led groups, and that group is growing. We want to increase that from a small group when we first started to we want to exceed 100. Why are we doing this? What's the climate moment that we are trying to respond to? Well, climate impacts are accelerating. We all know that. We know that public concern remains high, but climate conversation has faded, especially in politics. And we're seeing that as a phenomenon around the world, and it's essentially a troubling climate silence that's spreading that we feel we need to do something about. And there is a gap between concern and conversation, a perception gap where we don't actually believe that people around us are as concerned about the issue as we are. And so one of the ways to deal with that and to close that gap is to enter into conversation. And the reason that we really want to encourage this entry into conversation is that silence does not mean people don't care. We perceive that might be the case, but it's not true. But it does mean that we feel alone. We're uncertain because we're not sure others that we know care as much as we do. And it also leads to a silencing at a political level. Media cover politicians. When politicians aren't covering the issues, they perceive a greater silence. And the silence also supports the spread of disinformation. Conversations can change that. So our response at Seniors for Climate is a campaign for 2026 called Break Through the Climate Silence, Creating the Space for Action. Our theory of change is that conversation increases visibility, confidence, creates political space, and it supports action. And why would we think that we have a role to play? Well, we're trusted, we're connected, we're civically engaged, and as we all know, we vote. But also when we speak openly about climate, when we share our stories and our feelings about the issue, others feel less alone. Misinformation loses ground. Leadership becomes safer. And so it's not about being louder. I think it's about being more loving, but it's about making our concern more visible. And so we're planning a series of actions that I'll share a little bit more at the end of the session tonight in terms of dates and so on. But our idea for Breakthrough the Climate Silence campaign is to normalize climate conversations. We need to turn fear and avoidance into open everyday discussion in homes, community centers, and public spaces. We want to grow our mobilizations to more than 100 communities this year. We want to amplify seniors' voices nationally and share stories, our lived experience, our concerns, our skills, our moral responsibility. We want to counter misinformation through shared social norms and visibility. And we want to constructively influence decision makers by restoring public pressure. And it's fun. I can absolutely guarantee you it is absolutely fun. So let me stop here and give the screen back to Amber, and we'll talk a little bit more.
Thank you, Louise. So without further ado, I think that Bill probably needs very little introduction for most people here. He is one of the most influential environmentalists, activists, and authors of our time. He co-founded 350.org. Many of you may be familiar with a global grassroots movement. And tonight he'll be talking to us about his work to mobilize seniors through a new initiative called Third Act. And he'll also be talking about his most recent book, Here Comes the Sun. He is also the author of 20 other books, and he has received numerous honors, including the Right Livelihood Award and the Gandhi Peace Prize. So, Bill, so delighted to have you here. I feel like you have been in the backdrop of my entire career thus far in climate, and I'm so pleased that we get to spend some time with you. So, over to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I couldn't be happier but to join you, and it's a real pleasure. Um, Greetings from the Green Mountains of Vermont, where we actually had one last pretty good snowfall today. Let me begin by saying that I am well aware that really the last thing any of you need to hear is anything from this side of the border. You should trust that there are many of us who are deeply embarrassed by our government and working hard on all fronts to try and get rid of it. The two things we work on at Third Act are defending the climate and defending democracy. And through midterm elections, defense of democracy is especially key here. That's what I'm spending almost all my time doing out in the purple states where those elections will be won or lost. But I'm home today and very grateful to be talking with you. And I will just say that of all the manifest stupid things that our leader has done, his assault on Canada may be the maybe the single, not the most dangerous, but the single stupidest. Third Act was annoyed enough that on Canada Day this year, we assembled groups of us oldsters at several consulates and embassies to sing "Oh Canada" and just try to get across the idea that for most Americans, the preposterous nature of what's going on down here is not lost on us. So, with my apologies, let me talk for a minute about where we stand in the larger world and what we're trying to do about it. I did write the first book about what we now call the climate crisis, what we then called the greenhouse effect, way back in the 1980s, the end of nature. And I fear that pretty much everything we said was going to happen in those days has now happened or is in the process of happening. And it's come harder and faster than people even the most pessimistic among us were predicting 40 years ago. We live in a world that's already changed and transformed. Canada's obviously had a front row seat to all of this because the Arctic has changed faster and more dramatically than just about any place on the planet due to the physics of climate change. This, what we would call Arctic amplification, has been a huge force. Just to give you the kind of latest update, the last 3 years have been the 3 hottest years we've ever recorded on this planet. That record will almost certainly fall either this year or more likely next. We appear to be heading into a very serious El Nino that'll come in beginning this summer. And then we have then we will see higher temperatures than humans have ever seen before, and with it, more of the chaos that we've grown used to. You know what that chaos looks like, the floods and the fires and the astonishing heat waves. Again, Canada's been at the front of this. I think of all the crazy numbers that we've assembled in the global warming era. Few are more extreme than those temperature readings from a few years ago in interior British Columbia and Lytton and other places, where the temperature got above 120 degrees Fahrenheit, with all the obvious consequences, including the town burning to the ground the next day. And you've seen the enormous fires that have swept the boreal forests of Canada, places that should have been too cold, too wet, too far north to really burn. Canada in 2023, at the height of those fires, that year, Canada was the fourth largest carbon emitter in the world, following the US, China, and India, despite its population, simply because of the amount of carbon that poured into the atmosphere from those fires. We're now reaching a point where we're doing beyond all those day-by-day catastrophes, systemic damage to the biggest physical systems on the Earth. The jet stream, which draws its power from the temperature differential between the equator and the poles. As the poles have warmed, that temperature differential has shrunk. The jet stream gets stuck in high amplitude, wonky positions that account for these long spells of strange weather on either side. Off the Atlantic coast, the greatest heat distribution engine in the world, those giant Atlantic currents like the Gulf Stream, that together have a volume 100 times that of the Amazon River, are now flickering and faltering as fresh water pours off a melting Greenland and Arctic sea ice pack, changing the salinity and hence the density of seawater in the North Atlantic. And it's that density that drives those giant conveyor belts of water that distribute heat so effectively around the Earth. I could go on like this for a long time. I won't do that. Suffice it to say, though, that we're now cutting through muscle to bone, and that we have a very short time in order to deal with this if we still can. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us a few years ago that if we had any hope of even staying on anything like the timetable we laid out in Paris just a decade ago, we would need to cut emissions in half by 2030, which by my watch is 3 years and 8 months away. So we're up again. And of course, all of this is made much harder by the fact that large swaths of the planet, including the United States, now fall under one form or another, one shade or another of authoritarian rule, which makes the response harder than it even otherwise would be. The US is historically the biggest emitter of carbon into the atmosphere. and no one will ever catch us, not the Chinese, not anybody else. It's all still up there. The stuff that poured out of the back of my family's Plymouth Fury when I was learning to drive in the 1970s in Boston is still up there in the atmosphere, trapping heat. And yet our country has decided to withdraw from the Paris process, no longer attends international meetings, indeed has revoked the so-called endangerment finding that was the official US recognition that climate change was real. And, we see the same thing in different shades in Russia, in much of the Middle East, to one degree or another in other parts of the world. And this, as I say, makes it more difficult. Against all this, against all these big bad things, there is one big good thing happening on planet Earth, and it's big enough and good enough that it may allow us to take some bite out of both the climate and the authoritarianism crises. And that's this very rapid and very sudden rise in renewable energy. The stuff that all our lives we've called alternative energy, but isn't alternative in any way anymore. It's now the obvious common sense choice for the future. 90% more of new electric generation last year around the world came from the sun and the wind. This is brand new. Something like 5 years ago, we crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper for us to produce power from solar and wind power than from the combustion of coal and gas and oil. We live, just to reiterate the point, on a planet where the cheapest way to make power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. And that is a remarkable, epochal moment for human civilization because we've spent the last 400,000 years merrily setting things on fire. And mostly fire's been good. We learned to cook food. That gave us the big brain. We could move north and south from the equator. Canada was not a particularly hospitable place to live prior to the discovery of fire. The anthropologists even think that standing around the campfire all night for eons helped produce the social bonds that mark our species. It was, I guess, a kind of proto-Zoom. When we learned to control the combustion of coal and gas and oil, we called that the Industrial Revolution, and it produced modernity, everything around us. So fire good until more recently when it's become clear that fire is a big threat. I've described the climate threat already. It's the one existential thing that humans have ever faced, aside perhaps from nuclear war. But it's not the only reason to be worried about combustion. 9 million people a year die on this planet. About one death in 5 from breathing the combustion byproducts of those fossil fuels. There's 5 million school children in New Delhi. 2.5 million of them have irreversible lung damage from breathing the air. And by the way, I'll add that all those fires also contribute to that lung damage. There's a new study out today saying that the 2023 fires in Canada produced about 80,000 deaths, premature deaths worldwide from all the effects of breathing in that stuff. The third reason to want to get away from burning fossil fuel is because as long as we depend on a thing that's only available in a few places, the people who live in those places end up with more wealth and power than they deserve, and they use them in ways that are inimical to human health, to human well-being. So, that's Vladimir Putin. That's in my country, the Koch brothers, our biggest oil and gas barons. That's the king of Saudi Arabia. That obviously is Donald Trump. Our country invaded Venezuela earlier this year and didn't even bother to talk about democracy or anything, no pretense. Donald Trump said, "You have oil and we want it." You've all watched the events in Iran. I imagine with as much dismay as I have over recent weeks. That means that the U.S. has now attacked the countries with the second and third largest oil reserves on the planet in the last 7 weeks, 8 weeks. It's very nice to imagine a world where this doesn't happen because we rely on energy sources that are available to everyone everywhere. Think how the history of the world would have been different over the last 100 years if oil had been of trivial value in those years. Think of the coups and wars and assassination attempts and things that would have been avoided. Think in your own country of the unbalanced political power that comes from Alberta's place in the federal pecking order. Humans are good at fighting wars, and all too good, as recent events demonstrate again and again. But it's hard to imagine people figuring out a way to fight a war over sunshine. So the prospect here is really quite powerful. Not for ending global warming. It is too late for that. But not too late to start shaving tenths of a degree off how hot the planet eventually gets. And every tenth of a degree Celsius that we raise the temperature of the Earth moves 100 million of our brothers and sisters from a safe climate zone to a dangerous one. So this remains the biggest, most important task that humans have ever undertaken. It's very good news, full of possibility. And when we look around the world and see it starting to happen, we should be enormously glad. It's headquartered in China, this transition, and it's really the last 36 months that it's been underway. The Chinese have built half the clean energy on the planet, and the rate at which they're doing it is an indication of how fast the world could move if it wanted to. This time last year, the Chinese were building 3 gigawatts of solar panels a day. A gigawatt's the rough equivalent of a large coal-fired power plant. They were putting up one of those out of solar panels every 8 hours. It's not just China that's done this. California, fourth largest economy in the world, now produces most of the electricity, more than 100% of its electricity, for long stretches of almost every day. At night, when the sun goes down in the Golden State, the biggest source of supply to the grid are batteries that have spent the afternoon soaking up excess sunshine, batteries that didn't exist 3 years ago. In the States, the state that's now surpassed California for the rate at which it's putting up clean energy technology is Texas, which is pretty remarkable. Around the world, we see the same kind of things happening. The most beautiful stories often come from the developing world. Pakistan, cursed by climate change, the 2 worst floods since Noah in the last decade, brutal summertime temperatures now that often top 125 degrees. But Pakistan is blessed geographically in one way, a border with China, across which have flowed huge numbers of cheap Chinese solar panels. Pakistanis, using YouTube videos as their guide, have built the equivalent of half the country's national electric grid in 18 months. This is now happening across Africa along Chinese trade routes. Truly remarkable to see the speed with which it's going. Country after country. Cuba, now under severe duress from the U.S., it's one thing it has going for it is the fact that it's imported in the last year a gigawatts worth of solar panels from China, and that's making up for at least a little of the embargoed oil from which we're trying to squeeze the life out of that country. Lebanon, under savage attack tonight, has moved from a couple of percent solar power to about 30% solar power for its electricity in the last 2 years. And that's a very good thing as power plants and things become targets in our new wars. So all of this is good news unless you own an oil well or a coal mine, in which case it's a big threat, and you will do what you can to, to quash this transition. We see that, of course, happening in the US. Candidate Trump told Big Oil that if they gave him $1 billion in campaign donations, he would do whatever they asked. They ponied up closer to $500 million in the last election cycle, all told, between donations and lobbying and advertising. And that was enough. Donald Trump has shut down wind farms off the Atlantic seaboard that were 90% complete. He's put federal lands across the country off limits to solar panels. You've seen all of this. Last week, he informed Americans that we would be paying $1 billion in tax money to buy out the leases of companies that had purchased them to develop more wind power off the eastern seaboard. Now we're paying them $1 billion to make sure that that wind stays forever uncaptured. This is extremely unwise public policy. Indeed, it's, in the case of the United States, damn near treasonous. These technologies were invented in the US. The first solar cell was in 1956 at Bell Labs in Edison, New Jersey. The first industrial wind turbine was 1943 in my state of Vermont. The first lithium-ion battery came in the 1970s. In the course of the last 14 months, we've turned over this technological advantage lock, stock, and barrel to the country that's theoretically our main adversary. I'm not sure that there has ever been an act of economic self-sabotage much larger than this. And of course, Canada has been under enormous pressure to go along in many, many ways. Some of that pressure external from the US as we attempt to monkey around with the rules about, say, automobiles, and some of it internal as Alberta pressures Ottawa to, to continue bolstering the fossil fuel industry that will be the death of us all. So I'll tell you what it is we're trying to do about it here in the States and to some degree globally. Third act, let me say, first of all, is about 3 years old now, 4 years old now. We started it on the theory that older people should be playing a larger part in progressive politics. And though people told us that people got more conservative as they aged, we really didn't believe it, at least for this generation of older Americans, because if you're in your third act now, your first act was in that period in the 1960s and 1970s of extraordinary social and cultural and political change, when we saw the height of the civil rights movement, the height of the peace movement, and the first Earth Day, which drew 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population, into the streets. And within 18 months had produced the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the Environmental Protection Administration, the things that became templates for environmental action around the world, and the things that the Trump administration is now doing everything it can to gut. So we were hopeful that older people would rally, and indeed they have. Third Act has proved to be remarkably successful in its growth. We have about 120,000 people, and we have very, very active chapters in almost every state that have proved to be extremely adept at pressuring state and local officials for change. Some of that's around democracy, and we're very big on registering voters, on defending voting rights and voting laws. And we're now deeply engaged in the fight over the midterm elections. Under American election law, you can set up what's called a PAC, a political action committee, to try and influence these things. So we have one, and it's called Gray PAC. And well, we're good at this. And it's important work because, at least in America, one distinguishing factor for older people is the rate at which they vote. There is no known way to stop old people from voting. And so we find it very fertile ground in which to work. But we're also, while we're trying to change Washington, also working hard at the state and local level on, most importantly, these campaigns around clean energy. We've started this thing that we call the Simplify Solar campaign that's been extremely productive. We really grew out of this thing we did last year called Sun Day, which is a big celebration of renewable energy. We had 500 events across the country. And the things that we focused on, because we can do these without Washington, were campaigns to make it much easier to build rooftop solar in this country. Americans pay 3 or 4 times what Europeans and Australians pay to put solar panels on the roof. It's mostly due to excess bureaucracy. We have 15,000 jurisdictions in this country. Each has their own set of rules. They'd all like to send inspectors up on your roof and look at design drawings and on, none of which is necessary. In the rest of the world, it's about as complicated as buying a new refrigerator. You call some guy up on Monday, by Wednesday, he's up on the roof putting in solar panels. By Friday, you're connected to the grid. It's cheap, and that cheapness matters. In Australia, for instance, we're closing in on 40% of homes with solar panels on the roof. What does that mean? It means that there's so much solar power now in Australia that beginning in June, all Australians henceforth will get 3 free hours of electricity every afternoon between 12 and 3. And they will use it, of course, to charge their cars, to run their dishwasher, to schedule their washing machine. And everybody's going out now and buying storage batteries so that they can soak up that excess power when it's free and run their home all night. It's the kind of thing that's possible everywhere on this planet. Australia is the same latitude as Canada. I mean, it's like Canada in so many ways, and Canada has all the resources it needs, especially wind, to do just the same thing. So we're pushing hard on that in the States. We have this instant permitting thing, an app called the Solar App Plus, developed by our National Renewable Energy Lab. And 3 states, California, New Jersey, and Connecticut, I think, have now adopted it. We need the other 47 to do it. That will speed things up. The other thing that we're hard at work on, and one that I think translates very easily across the border, is all-out advocacy for what we're calling balcony solar or plug-in solar. Those of you who are paying attention have probably noted that in Europe over the last 3 years, there's been a huge explosion in this stuff. 5 million Europeans have gone to whatever you call Best Buy in Milan and put down a few €100 and come home with a solar panel designed not to go on the roof, but to be zip tied to the railing of a apartment balcony. And on the back, there's a plug, and you just plug it into the wall. No electrician required. Doesn't solve all the problems. It provides 20, 25% of the power draw in an average apartment. So not everything, but not nothing either. Unfortunately, it's been illegal everywhere in the US and I think in Canada as well until recently. But out of that Sunday campaign have come active bills in 28 state legislatures, and we're starting to get some big victories over these recent weeks. Utah was the first state to adopt it, which proves the uh, ideological ambiguity of all of this, because Utah is not a very progressive place. Nonetheless, on libertarian grounds, if it's good enough for Stuttgart, it's good enough for Salt Lake City. The Utah legislature unanimously backed this. We've in recent days had the same thing happen in Virginia and Maine. We expect Vermont, Colorado, perhaps California before the spring is out. So we'll have a robust market for this plug-in solar. We have a lot of stuff about how to do this and how to make the arguments and things that we're welcome to share with any of you all up there who want to do anything the same. I don't know everything about Canadian politics. I lived in Canada when I was a boy for 5 years in Leaside, in Toronto. Went to Northlee Public School, 1 year behind Stephen Harper. So I love and pay attention to Canada when I can. And I know that there are enormous assets to work with up there. I will say that I both like and in many ways trust Mark Carney. I think he understands the climate crisis, and I think he is under extraordinary pressure from the United States, and it limits his action, and I think that that's too bad. And I don't know how he deals with Alberta or anybody else does. I also know and deeply admire Avi Lewis, and was very happy to see him take control of the NDP, because I know that he and Naomi completely understand the climate fix in powerful ways. And I think it'll be very useful to Carney to have a coherent and credible environmental critique. And though I know she's not exactly hugely powerful anymore, I have great affection for my old friend Elizabeth May. I'm actually going to be in Vancouver next week to give a TED Talk of all things, and I'm looking forward to sitting down for breakfast with her and catching up on things. Whenever there's a Canadian election, I stay up late to watch the Saanich Islands riding come in, just to make sure that she's been returned once more to Ottawa. So I know that you have both obstacles and things to work with up there, and I hope that you will figure out ways to do that. And let me suggest that as you do it, it's really important to talk about the scientific necessity of where we stand, and really important to talk about the economic pragmatism of where we stand. It is, on the one hand, the cheapest way to proceed to use renewable power. And on the other hand, Canada's current plans to, say, boost liquefied natural gas production, I think, are economic folly, because I don't think the market's going to be there. One effect of America's insane war in Iran has been to remind everybody around the world that they want off this stuff as fast as they can. And that's what's happening in country after country. Places like Indonesia, which in the last 2 weeks have announced plans to build 100 gigawatts of solar power. Vietnam, all the places that are the putative markets for that Canadian LNG are making it clear that they would rather depend on the sun. And my guess is that they will. Important to talk about scientific necessity, important to talk about economic pragmatism, but also useful to talk about the beauty of the world that's possible on the other side here. Human connection to the sun, to our local star, to the most charismatic object in our corner of the universe, runs very deep, you know. We don't exactly know how prehistoric people thought about things because being prehistoric, they failed to write it down. But every time they built a pile of rocks, something like Stonehenge, it points at the solstice or the equinox, you know. The minute that humans started inventing mythologies, the very first thing they had to figure out was, you know, how does this thing rise over here in the morning and set over here in the evening and get back over here the next morning? And so we have extraordinary number of beautiful stories about giant emus who swallow up the sun and then vomit it forth, and on and on and on. And that affection continues. I was in Rome last September because the new pope, who I think I got to say is a real hero, and I was so grateful for his interventions over the last 48 hours. And once our president had announced his desire to end the Persian civilization. At any rate, Leo called a bunch of us over for a celebration to mark the 10th anniversary of Pope Francis's encyclical on global warming, Laudato Si. And it was a very good gathering. This guy, Leo, turns out to be an absolutely normal 70-year-old American male who seemed utterly familiar to me and like a very good guy. And he announced that he was going forward with all of Francis's environmental work. He also said that later this year, Rome would they would flip a switch on the big solar farm they had built outside Rome, and Vatican City would become the first fully solar-powered nation on planet Earth, which I thought was very good news. And so when it was my turn to speak, I got up and said, thank you very much. And it really suggests what our mantra going forward needs to be. Energy from heaven, not from hell. And I got to tell you, I've seen what that hell looks like because I've spent a fair amount of time walking around in the tar sands above Fort McMurray there, you know. It's one of the planet's great versions of Mordor, of Hades at this point. And the prospect that we can replace it with energy from the sun is extraordinarily beautiful and extraordinarily powerful. But it'll take a lot of pushing to get there if we're going to do it in the time that counts for the climate crisis. Yes, economics alone mean that 40 years from now, we'll run the world on sun and wind. But if it takes us anything like 40 years to get there, then the world we run on sun and wind will be a broken world. So our job is to catalyze that reaction, to make it happen fast. And particularly, I think, the job of older people. Young people are overwhelmed right now on this planet, overwhelmed, among other things, by just the simple job of finding a job and figuring out how to build a house and build a life and all of that. It's harder than it was when we did it. And they suffer an extraordinary amount from this climate anxiety. But when I talk to them, and I've done a lot of organizing work with young people over the years, I find that they're actually less anxious about what's going to happen to the climate than they are about the thought that they've kind of been left alone to deal with it themselves. And so simply making sure that they understand they haven't been abandoned, that there are people who have their back is really important. I remember the very first demonstration we did at Third Act 4 years ago now came when friends of mine from Fridays for the Future, the kind of American offshoot of Greta's movement, high school kids said, we want to take on the big banks. Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Citi, that are the biggest funders of the fossil fuel industry. And to that list, I'm afraid one needs to add RBC. And they said, we want to go protest, but we don't have checking accounts, we don't have credit cards, they won't listen to us. Will you come help? And so I said, well, if there's one thing we have, it's credit cards. So yeah, we're there. We're ready to back you up. And I remember the very first demonstration we did was in Boston. And there were 300 or 400 high school kids there because high school kids understand the barrel of the gun down which they are staring. And they're somewhat sprier, so they were at the head of the march. But at the back of the march, there was a big group of us from this nascent Third Act who had a big banner that just said, fossils against fossil fuels. And the kids that were there laughed, as they should have, and enjoyed it. And they also, I know, felt seen, heard, understood, supported. We've got to keep that up, and we have kept that up. We went on to campaign around those banks very extensively. We had a day of action where we, in 100 cities, staged sit-ins outside those banks. In fact, since we've reached the age where sprawling on the sidewalk is less fun than it once was, we went to all the Goodwill stores around and got every rocking chair we could find. And those are what we used to close down those banks for the day. The New York Times called it the rocking chair rebellion. So we're very serious about all this stuff and eager to keep at it. And we think that there is more room than there's ever been for action here, more possibility. And we're extremely grateful for the work that you all are doing on just the same lines north of the border. And we're eager to help out when we can. And, you tell us what would be useful, and we'll try and do what we can. I'll just finish by saying one thing that we've worked hard on is to bring art and music into this work because we think it's very important. And because, whenever young people go on to me about okay boomer and things, I always just nod and say, I get where you're coming from. But our generation did produce the best music that there ever was. And so we've been very careful to make sure that we have friends and allies like Bette Midler or Carole King or your own Neil Young to work with closely all the time and to try and really make that happen. And you, of course, have extraordinary assets along these same lines from just thinking about Vancouver. So, of course, my old friend David Suzuki, uh, uh, though he grows sometimes despondent, I think now he also remains an extraordinary activist and willing to work hard. To my old friend Rafi, who has huge constituencies of his own, on and on and on. So don't neglect the culture either. Figure out how to be as creative as you can in this work would be my advice. I'm going to stop here. I've probably rattled on too long already, but I just want to say we don't know how this is going to come out. It's possible we've waited too long to get started. There's obviously been tons of damage already, and there will be more. But it is the most important work that you could possibly be engaged in. And I just, as I say, could not be more grateful to you all for taking it on. God bless you, and we'll see what we can get to. So many thanks.
Thank you, Bill. God bless you as well. We have more than 50 questions that have come in during the time that you've talked. I would encourage people to go take a look at those, and just a little tip, there's a little thumb that you can use to upvote. So often you'll be holding the same question as other people, as someone else may have asked. And so we've got a few of those that seem to be rising to the top here, and encourage you to go take a look and use the Q&A function, and we'll get to a few of those in a moment. So, Bill, when people registered, we also asked if they had something that they'd like to hear about from you. You've actually answered quite a few of those, but I just wanted to go back to the people who are on this call, seniors, and I know that one of the questions that the organizing group is holding is how to engage more, how to appeal more broadly to seniors. And given your work with Third Act, I'm just curious if there's any tips or strategies that you would recommend they keep in mind as they plan the year ahead.
Well, I think, this is a very good question. And I think that the key is to make things as interesting as possible. And that means different things. It means some of that work around art and culture, but it also means having a good series of fights to draw people into. And so we're, for instance, this work around, say, plug-in solar or balcony solar that we've been doing is very understandable to people, very easy to illustrate. It allows us to fight this fight in every state house and many city halls across the country. And so it's been a very good work for drawing people in. But also, big, wide coalitional building's important too. Here in the States, we've had several of these. You may have seen these No Kings Days in this country, because once upon a time America was against kings, and all the people who were for them had to flee north to Canada. Back in the day, and we've been a big part of that organizing. If people have seen pictures of No King's Days, there's an overrepresentation of people with hairlines like mine. One of the ways that we've really worked on that is to help remind people of the legacy that people our age have. Right now, I'm in the process of interviewing lots and lots of people among our oldest members, people in their 90s and their hundreds, who are too old to get out easily to protest, but the perfect vehicle for explaining to other Americans how odd and abnormal our political life is. Because, America is about to turn 250. If you're 83, you've been around for a third of its entire history. And those interviews have been poignant and powerful, talking with people who say things like, my sister died of polio when I was 4, and I was the very first in my town to sign up to be vaccinated and stuff. And it drives me crazy to see what's happening now. Drawing on that well of memory is important. I think it's really important for us to understand that we have a particular identity as older people, and to draw on that we're not just one more sort of campaigning group, that we have a distinctive thing about us, and figure out ways to make that a big asset.
Yeah, thank you. I leaned in when you said that young people don't want to feel abandoned, and that it's important that we know that you're there. And I certainly feel that in the time that I get to spend with Seniors for Climate. And Here Comes the Sun, and I guess building on what you've just been talking about, you talk about a new proactive activism. And it doesn't look precisely like environmentalism of the past few decades. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Environmentalists by necessity have been good at stopping things. Um, and that's been very important. And I take great pride in the work that we've done. I mean, I helped lead the campaign to stop the Keystone pipeline down out of the tar sands and across the heartland of the US. And it was a big, long struggle and an ultimately successful one. Um, and I know that many people there have worked on the TMX pipeline and that, on and on and on. Um, and that's been really important work. But we live in a slightly different world now. The first 35 years of the climate crisis, we were in a world where fossil fuel was relatively cheap and renewable energy relatively expensive. And so much of the job of the climate fight was to try and make fossil fuel more expensive. That's what carbon taxes were about. That's why we were trying to stop the expansion and consolidation of this industry, and with some success. When we started the Keystone fight, the plan in Alberta was to triple or quadruple the amount of stuff coming out of the tar sands. And I think that's not ever going to happen now. There was the big fossil fuel divestment fight to raise the cost of capital for companies. All of those were important, but now we live in a world where it's at least as important to rapidly spread this cheaper technology, sun and wind. And that means being very willing to say we need to build this stuff and to be to oppose those who will try to stop it on whatever grounds, including the grounds of I don't want to look at it, which is not a good grounds for opposing something. I wrote a piece for a magazine in the States a couple of years ago called Yes in My Backyard. And I said, I'm just really here talking to my tribe of overeducated white people who are the ones who are really good at suing to stop stuff. And we should not do that anymore. I don't think that that rule applies, say, to First Nations people who have taken it on the chin from every stage of industrial development there have ever been. And if they have sacred sites where they don't want a lithium mine, then fine. And we've got enough room and enough stuff to do most of what we need to do anyway. But I do think that it's not okay for older people to, I mean, I love my home state of Vermont, but there are times when I tell people that I think our motto should be change anything you want once I'm dead. And I don't think that's okay. I think we, above all, need to be responsive to the moment that we find ourselves in.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have a question here about effective ways to counterbalance the influence of the fossil fuel industry on public policy, something that continues to be very impactful here in Canada. And I know either through your work with 350.org or Third Act, do you have any advice at this moment for the people here on this call of what would you say are some of the most effective ways to counterbalance the influence of fossil fuels on public policy?
Well, look, part of this is one place where I think things are a little different in some ways on either side of the border. Money is not quite as determinative in Canadian political life as it is in American political life. Our policy of letting corporations spend any amount of money on elections and things is one of the reasons that we're in the deep trouble that we're in as a nation. And Canada is not perfect, but it's not as bad. So, but I do think that Canadian media and other things often suffer from some of the same flaws that we see in this country. And so it's important to be good at setting the record straight. And one of the ways to do that is to try and do things like we did last year with this Sunday thing, which was really a very good way to wake people up to what's changed. We're going to do it again next year in 2027, and this time we're going to do it globally. So circle the summer solstice for 2027. I think it's going to be a day of celebration and activism across the planet. And I think a very good opportunity on every front to use all the vehicles that we have, from social media to op-eds to, the CBC or whatever else, to just say, your notion about energy is wrong now. And I think that actually this is an easier and easier point to make. I think it's gotten much easier even in the last 6 weeks. I write this free newsletter on Substack called The Crucial Years that people are welcome to look at. And in the most recent one yesterday, I said, I think the biggest result of the war in Iran in energy terms will be that it's forever changed for much of the world the kind of emotional valence around energy. For our whole lives, and for longer than that, we've thought of fossil fuel as providing freedom and power. It gave us unprecedented mobility. It allowed us to do all kinds of things. And as a result, it became synonymous in our minds with those things. With now, I think, increasingly, it's synonymous with peril and with the threat of poverty. The cost can go up or down wildly, and its availability can go up or down wildly. People have talked for years about the intermittency of renewable energy, a problem that, by the way, we've more or less solved with the rapid spread of battery technology over the last 3 years. But what's intermittent, clearly, is the flow of oil out of the Middle East. It can be turned off with, 3 drones, and it has been. And so I think that emotional valence has changed, and that will have enormous effect. It'll be hardest to get that across in the 20% of the world that are net exporters of fossil fuel. The 80% of the planet that lives in countries that have to import it are remarkably sensitive to this and very eager to change. That's the reason that one big reason that China has led this parade. They don't want to be dependent on anyone. For us, it remains at least putatively a source of prosperity, but not really. And time for us to at least be making this case powerfully.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to go to some of the questions that have come in while you've been talking. This one comes from Robin Newton. She says, and it's echoed by 41 other people, the biggest challenge I have found in speaking to friends and family is that they think it's too late, that we are doomed. How do you counter this, or how do we counter this?
Well, I mean, far be it from me to be overly optimistic. I mean, the name of the first book that I wrote all about this 40 years ago was the cheerful title, The End of Nature, So I'm not a Pollyanna. And we are in a great deal of trouble. But there is a huge difference between a planet that warms 2 degrees Celsius and a planet that warms 3 degrees Celsius. One of those will be more miserable than anything we've dealt with previously in human history, and the other is going to be probably impossible. So we remain capable not of stopping climate change, but perhaps of stopping it short of the place where it simply cuts civilization off at the knees. There are scientists who think we've waited too long already. If we have a window, it's clearly closing. So we need to move very fast. But despair never strikes me as a very useful approach here. One needs to be just very real. I mean, we're in a very tough spot. We're going to do what we can, and we're going to see where that leaves us.
Somewhat similarly, there's a question here from Anne Grant. And I think it's one thing that communicators are often struggling with at the moment. People are so concerned about cost of living, inequality, housing, healthcare. I wonder if climate concerns could be connected to those concerns more. So I'm just curious if
Yes,
you have any advice on that.
yeah, absolutely. And that's what I've been trying to do in a way. Um, I mean, the most important fact that I've told you tonight is that we now live on a planet where the cheapest way to make energy is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. And I repeat that phrase because I think it lodges in people's heads if they hear it enough. Um, the ways that we're doing things at the moment are extremely expensive. Fossil fuel is expensive because you have to keep buying more of it all the time. Once you've put up a solar panel, the sun delivers the energy for free when it rises above the horizon, which, by the way, is the reason that oil companies hate it so much. From their point of view, that's the stupidest business model of all time. But there are a lot of other things that come with electrification of the planet that are very good for people's budgets too. The EV turns out to be a vastly superior alternative to the internal combustion car, far, far cheaper to operate and maintain. I'm very glad to see Canada deciding that it's not going to follow Detroit off a cliff and decide to try and do what it can around EVs. I think it's a very wise decision. I think that e-bikes turn out to be at least as important and interesting. In some ways, I think for most of the world, the e-bike is going to be the most powerful invention of the decade. I mean, a bicycle is a good thing to begin with, but now we have a bicycle that has no hills. And that's a truly remarkable change because getting your body and your stuff up and down hills have been a challenge for human beings since all time, and now it's not. You can go 5 miles on a penny's worth of electricity on an e-bike. It's transforming Africa and Asia. The heat pump is a hugely superior version of the furnace, providing both heating and cooling at much more modest use of energy along the way. And it's the kind of thing that provinces can figure out how to subsidize and supply in
Yeah.
short order. It's not complicated technology or equipment. Uh, in people's homes, the third part of this trinity is the induction cooktop. Um, you can get one for $60 online. I'm the cook in our household. I've used them for many years. I can't tell you how it works, magnets, but it boils water faster than the open campfire that used to be in my kitchen. And that open campfire increases by 50% the chance that your kid's going to come down with asthma because you're spewing uh, particulates into the air in the place where you live, which is not a good way to do it if you don't have to do it. So these are all the kind of things that allow people to live more convenient and more affordable lives. We just need to figure out how to help with the upfront cost so that the savings then become something that stretches everybody's budget. And one way to do this as we work on new housing, which we very much need to do, and I'm very much in favor of Canada's initiatives around housing, and I hope that they concentrate on dense urban infill housing. Very important to build new stuff so that with all of this in mind, so that they become much, much cheaper to operate. And of course, to build them along the transit lines so that people don't require, if they don't want one, a car, which is the most expensive ornament in many lives. When I lived in Toronto, when I was a boy, I grew to love the public transit system there and to know it well. And it's a reminder of how freeing good transit is for people of all kinds and all abilities and so on and so forth. So there's a ton that we can do to connect these things up. Those of you who recall the LEAP manifesto of some years ago will remember that this was the sort of list of things, and exactly the whole point was to tie affordability and jobs to action around the climate. And I'm very glad to see that coming back into the discussion. I think Avi Lewis will be a really important source of constant provocation along these lines, which is good. It's what any system needs. And, y'all will someday figure out how to deal with this first past the post problem that you have. And then Canadian politics will become more interesting still. And once you've figured out how to do it, maybe we can borrow some of that wisdom and do something about our binary system down here.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions before we pass it back to you, Louise. So there's a question here from Mike Nickerson. Is it possible to solve the carbon issue without shifting from the growth-based economy to a life-based one? Small question, just to round
Yeah,
out the evening.
well, it actually is a good place to end. And Mike, I've spent much of my life writing about and working on just that question. You may find in your library a book called Deep Economy, which was my effort to really try and understand kind of growth. And I do not think that economic growth makes us as happy as we assume. I think that humans were, it turns out, built for contact with other human beings and for contact with the natural world. And I think that's what we respond to and makes us happiest. I also think that we're not going to change our consumer orientations fast enough to make much of a dent on the climate crisis in the time that we have. 100 years from now, I think humans will have very different ways of amusing themselves. And I work hard to try and bring that day closer. But I don't think that's going to happen in the next 5 years. 100 million human beings enter what we call the consuming class now each year, most of them in Asia. And I think that most of them, to one extent or another, are going to follow down the path that we have trodden in the West. And so I think it is incumbent upon us to provide technological ways to keep that from overwhelming the planet. And the good news is that these technological means I've been describing, wind turbines, solar panels, batteries, strike me in and of themselves as potentially somewhat subversive of the growth model that we have put forward on this planet. When we rely on fossil fuel, we rely on things that are only available in a few places, and that produces, as a byproduct, oligarchs. When we rely on things that are available everywhere, that moves us to some degree or another closer to some kind of economic democracy. And that's most obvious for people living in the poorest parts of the world who currently pay a king's ransom to get fossil fuel from elsewhere, but who happily are better supplied with sunshine than we are. Though we have plenty of sunshine and even more wind at higher latitudes to get the job done. So I think that there are some very liberatory things about the shift that I'm talking about. I really can't think of any more specific subversive thing we could do than make this kind of shift rapidly. It won't change everything, but it'll change more than anything else I can think of. So don't give up on the idea of a life-based world. We're not going to live long enough to see that dramatic transition, but we can help put in place the things that will make it easier for humans to evolve in more interesting ways in the time ahead. Job one is to make sure we don't drive ourselves to the edge of extinction. And job two is to supply ourselves with the things like solar panels that allow us to think a little differently and more creatively about what the future might look like.
Well, Bill, I think that brings this time to a close. I want to say thank you so much for what you've shared with us this evening and for the work that you're doing. I know that many people were taking notes, of which I did put in capital, no known way to stop old people from voting, and many other little nuggets. So thank you so much.
There you go. Well, thank you all so much. And again, apologies for the havoc that we're causing in our country right now. Hopefully we can, reboot, turn off America and turn it on again and see if it works a little better in the not too distant future. And in the meantime, just bear with us. But many thanks to you all, and I'll look forward to seeing you all in person and to working together in the time ahead.
Will do. Thank you, Bill. Over to you, Louise, to talk a little bit more about some of the events that are coming up.
Super. Thank you so much. And thank you, Bill. This is a very, very nice setup for us. And I'm looking forward to 2027, actually, and being part of a summer solstice event. So just for those of you on the call and thinking about how come I'm not already involved, we want to give you a sense of what we're planning for this year. From June 1st to 7th, the Breakthrough the Climate Silence campaign will be running. First thing to say, yes, we want everybody having a conversation in their own way, in their own place. But the first thing to say is that anybody can participate. Anybody can organize an event, from a kitchen party, a dinner party, a community conversation. So don't feel you have to be an experienced grassroots organizer to participate. The event in June is designed for that conversational aspect of it, getting our legs under our feet, if you will, so that we are ready for the second event this year in September, from the 14th to the 18th, where we're focusing more on federal engagement, getting leaders to talk about climate change, to build momentum from June through coordinated, respectful political engagement. And the goal there is dialogue, but more importantly, I think, or just as importantly, accountability and creating expectations for policy action. If you want to know more, you can always visit our website, seniorsforclimate.org, and you'll find a number of resources there. The first thing to say is, if you do want to host an event, and it doesn't have to be something that terrifies you, something that is within your own grasp, you can just let us know. You can sign up through contact info at seniorsforclimate.org, and we'll add you, or we'll help you add yourself to our interactive map of actions. We also have resources that we build and provide to everyone each year for their events, and to get access to that, or to keep on learning more about what we offer, join us through our mailing list, sign up for the mailing list. And again, just to say, anybody can be an organizer. Any gathering, large or small, matters. We're on all, of course, the social media feeds: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky. And of course, we also rely on donations, and don't hesitate. If you want to make a donation, we will welcome your contribution. And if you want a conversation with us and just have us talk you through it, don't hesitate to reach out. Send us an email at our admin or info email, and we'll be happy to chat with you. Okay, well, back to you, Amber.
Oh, thank you, Louise. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. There were many questions that we did not get to, but rest assured that they're really important. I know that the organizing team likes to review them, and it helps us track and understand what may be future events that could be of interest to everyone here. So once again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We will share the recording, and thank you for showing up. Please do check out the website and the various ways to get connected that Louise shared with you, and have a good evening. And thank you for all that you're doing. Bye-bye.